Hi, everyone. Janet Robinson here. Welcome back to the Deep Dive, the only place where my favorite normies, Tommy Bennett and Lilly Jones, unpack the mysteries from uncomfortable theories. So sink into your beanbag chair, grab a warm cup of tea, or just keep your eyes on the road. And let's get into it. Tommy, Lilly, take it away.
I want to start today by asking you to do something impossible. And I don't just mean difficult, I mean biologically impossible.
Okay.
I want you to close your eyes for a second. Ready? Now, I want you to visualize a brand new color.
And just to be clear, we're not talking about a mix here. So not a greenish purple or a neon brown, nothing like that.
Right. A completely new color. A primary color that does not exist anywhere in your current experience. Go ahead. Try to build it in your mind.
It's not working, is it?
It is absolutely not working.
Yeah.
I'm just seeing flashes of, stuff I already know. It feels like my brain is revving its engine, but the wheels are just stuck. I'm hitting a wall.
That's because scientifically you are hitting a wall. The biological limit of your imagination. Your brain literally cannot generate an image for a concept it doesn't have a label for.
And that feeling, that sensation of hitting a mental wall, that is exactly what we are deep diving into today. We're calling this the language prison. Because if you can't imagine a simple color, just because you lack the word for it, it begs this really unsettling question. How many complex ideas are you unable to think right now, just because you lack the vocabulary?
It's the ultimate unknown unknown.
Right.
We're looking at what's called the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis, linguistic relativity.
And our sources today are all over the map. We've got ancient texts like the Odyssey, modern anthropological experiments.
And the mission is to figure out if our native language is a tool we use to express reality, or if it's more like a cage that limits how much of that reality we can actually see.
Okay, let's get into this.
Yeah.
And we have to start with one of the weirdest literary mysteries I've ever heard of. This is the part of the research that made me go, wait, really? We need to talk about the mystery of the missing blue.
This is a great place to start. It all begins with William Gladstone. Yes, the guy who eventually became the British Prime Minister.
Right.
Before all that, he was a huge Homer nerd. And he did this deep, deep analysis of the Odyssey from around 800 BCE. And he noticed something bizarre about the descriptions.
Bizarre is putting it lightly. I remember the famous line about the wine-dark sea. It sounds poetic,
Yeah.
But if you stop and think about it,
Yeah.
the ocean is not the color of red wine.
Not at all. And it gets stranger. Homer describes sheep as violet. He describes honey as green.
Green honey, I mean, come on.
It suggests his whole categorization of color was just fundamentally different from ours. So Gladstone counted every color reference in the entire book. He found lots of black and white, a good amount of red, some yellow. But do you know which word never appears? Not one time.
Blue.
Blue. It's completely gone. And once he pointed this out, scholars sort of freaked out. They started combing through other ancient texts, the Icelandic sagas, ancient Chinese stories, the Hindu Vedas.
Right.
Same thing. None of them had a specific dedicated word for blue. They had words for light and dark, fresh and blood, but the sky and the ocean, they were just broad or void or sometimes just lumped in with green or black.
Okay, I have to play the skeptic for a second here. Because I can hear people listening and thinking, come on, just because they didn't write the word blue doesn't mean they were blind to it.
Yeah.
Their eyes were the same as ours.
Yeah.
Rods, cones, the whole setup. They were looking at the Aegean Sea. It's famously blue.
It is, and their eyes worked fine, you're right. It's not that they couldn't physically receive the light waves, but it's about cognitive categorization. If you don't have a word for a specific slice of the spectrum, your brain doesn't really treat it as a distinct thing. It just kind of blurs into the background.
So it's like, if I don't know the difference between an elm tree and an oak tree, to me I just see it's tree. But an arborist sees two totally different species.
Precisely. And what's fascinating is there's an evolutionary pattern to this. The linguist Guy Deutscher, he analyzed how languages develop color terms over time. It almost always happens in the same order.
This was the hierarchy thing, right?
Yes. Stage one is always black and white, or, light and dark. Then comes red. Red is always the first actual color to get its own name.
Which makes sense from a survival standpoint. Blood, fire, danger. You need to be able to shout red long before you need to shout beige.
Exactly. After that comes yellow and green, usually for plants and ripeness. And blue. Blue is always the latecomer. It shows up last.
I guess because there's not much blue in nature, is there? I mean, besides the sky, which you can't touch, and a few rare birds or flowers, maybe?
It's rare, except for the Egyptians.
Ah, The exception that proves the rule.
They were the first ancient culture to have a specific word for blue, but, and here's the kicker, they were also the first culture to manufacture blue pigment. They made blue dye.
So once they could hold the color in their hands, once they made it a distinct object, they needed a word for it. And once they had the word, they could see it everywhere else.
It strongly suggests that creating the distinct linguistic category allowed them to perceive the distinct visual reality.
That is such a wild thought. But I still feel like there's a gap between not having a word and literally not seeing it. So let's fast forward. Researchers wanted to test this for real, with actual people, not just old books.
And this brings us to the Himba tribe in Namibia. This study from the early 2000s is probably the strongest evidence we have for this whole language prison idea.
So the Himba language, it slices up the rainbow very differently than English.
Very differently. They have fewer basic color terms, and the key difference for this experiment is a word they have called buru.
Buru.
Now, buru encompasses what you and I would call green and blue. To a Himba speaker, they aren't two different colors. They're just shades of the same category.
So the researchers set up a test. They show a Himba participant a circle of 12 squares on a screen. 11 of them are green. One of them is clearly brightly blue. To you or me, that blue one just pops out. It screams, "I'm the different one."
It does. For an English speaker, your brain highlights it automatically. But when they showed this to the Himba participants, silence.
You're kidding? They couldn't find the blue square.
Many couldn't. And those who did took a really long time and made a lot of mistakes. To their brains, that circle looked like 12 shades of the same color. The blue one didn't jump out because their brain isn't trained to separate it from green. It was all just, ooh.
But wait, this is where it gets really nuts. They did a reverse test.
Yes, they showed a circle of 12 green squares. To you and me, they all look identical. But one of them was a slightly, ever so slightly, different shade of green. A difference that English speakers, we just can't really see it. We call it all green.
And the Himba.
They spotted it instantly.
Wow.
Because their language has multiple specific words for different types of green, for different kinds of vegetation, their vocabulary had trained their eyes to see differences that are basically invisible to us.
That's incredible. It's like their language gave them a superpower for green, but a blind spot for blue.
And here's the smoking gun, the thing that really seals it. They tracked Himba children. It turns out the kids could see the difference between blue and green just fine, until they learned the words. Once they learned the vocabulary, their perception physically shifted to match the language.
So the language didn't just describe what they saw. It pruned their brains.
The brain is efficient. If your culture says these two things are the same, the brain stops wasting energy trying to tell them apart. And that's the prison. The bars are made of vocabulary.
If that isn't enough to make you question reality, let's talk about space. Because it turns out that even the way we move through the world, left, right, forward, back, is just one way of doing things.
Right. This takes us to the Gugu Yamathir people in Australia. This is one of my favorite examples because it so fundamentally changes how the brain processes space itself.
Okay, so in English, we use what's called an egocentric system, which doesn't mean we're selfish. It just means the coordinate system is based on us. The cup is to my left, the door is behind me. If I turn around, left and right change.
But the Gugu Yamathir don't have words for left or right.
Okay.
They just don't exist. They use cardinal directions, north, south, east, west, for everything.
Everything, like even small-scale stuff on a table.
Everything. So you wouldn't say pass the salt to your left. You'd say, could you move the salt a little bit to the northwest?
Move the salt northwest. That sounds absolutely exhausting.
It sounds exhausting to us because our brains aren't running that software. But think about what that demands. To speak that language, you have to know where north is at every single moment of your life. Indoors, outdoors, cloudy days.
You have to have a compass just running in the background of your brain 24/7.
And they do. The linguist Stephen Levinson studied this. He'd take Gugu Yamathir speakers and put them in windowless rooms, unfamiliar buildings, spin them around, situations where you or I would be totally lost.
Oh, completely. I get lost in a shopping mall. In a windowless room, I have zero clue where north is.
Exactly. But Levinson found that even 5-year-old children in this tribe could point north instantly. Without any hesitation, they just knew. They blew English-speaking adults out of the water.
And again, this isn't because they have some kind of navigation gene.
No, it's because their language forces their brain to constantly process space relative to the planet, not relative to their own body. If they lose track of north, they literally can't speak properly. They can't ask for the salt, so the brain adapts.
It really is use it or lose it.
Yeah.
We rely on left and right, so our sense of absolute direction just withers away.
Or maybe it never even develops in the first place. We're trapped in this egocentric bubble because our language puts the self at the center of the universe. They're living in a geocentric reality.
Okay, so we've done color, we've done space. We have to address the big cliche, the one everyone knows. The Inuit have 50 words for snow.
Ah, yes. The classic.
Is it true? Or is it just, an urban legend?
Well, it's a bit of both. The 50 words thing is an exaggeration, a pop culture simplification. It's not like they just have a long list of synonyms.
Okay.
The reality is actually much more sophisticated. Inuit and Yupik languages are polysynthetic. They build words, they take a root word and add all these modifiers to it.
So it's a system of construction, not just a list.
Right. But the core idea holds true. They make crucial distinctions that we absolutely do not. For example, our source lists a few distinct terms. Kanek is falling snow.
Okay, Kanek.
Yeah.
Stuff coming down.
Then there's Pukak, that's the crystalline, salt-like snow on the ground. Aniu is specifically packed snow that you can use for drinking water. And Siku isn't even snow, it's sea ice.
To me, that's all just snow. Maybe I'd call Siku ice. But if I'm out there and I'm thirsty, knowing the difference between Aniu and Siku is literally life or death.
And that's the whole point. To an English speaker, the difference between Kanek and Pukak is a minor detail. To an Inuit speaker, they are as categorically different as water and rock are to us.
Because survival demands it. You don't want to try and build an igloo out of Pukak.
Exactly. When survival hangs in the balance, language has to expand to create those distinctions. And once the language creates the category, your perception follows. You stop seeing white stuff, and you start seeing specific tools, dangers, and resources.
That leads to a really disturbing question, doesn't it? If survival dictates our vocabulary, what critical distinctions are we missing in English because our survival hasn't demanded them yet?
That is the question that keeps linguists and probably a few philosophers up at night.
It brings me back to the cognitive prison idea. You mentioned earlier there are two versions of this theory.
Yes. The Sapir-Whorf hypothesis has a weak form and a strong form. The weak form says language influences thought.
Okay.
Almost everyone in the field accepts this now. The Himba see green better, the Gugu Yimithir navigate better. That seems pretty clear.
That seems undeniable, yeah. It's like having different apps installed on your brain.
But the strong form, which is called linguistic determinism, says language determines thought. Meaning, if you don't have the word, the thought itself is impossible.
That's the terrifying George Orwell 1984 version. If a government deletes the word freedom, people can't even yearn for it.
Right. And most modern linguists reject that absolute strong form. We can, technically explain a concept even if we don't have one single word for it, but the effort required is so high that we almost never do. We just take the path of least resistance.
We think in the grooves laid down by our vocabulary.
Precisely. And you can feel this friction with so-called untranslatable words. These are emotions or concepts that other cultures have paved a superhighway to, but in English, we're still hacking our way through the jungle with a machete.
Oh, I love these. The source mentioned a few great ones, like saudade from Portuguese.
Saudade, it's such a beautiful concept. People translate it as longing, but that's not it. It's a deep, melancholic nostalgia for something or someone you love, but with the painful awareness that it might never return. It's a sad feeling that is also somehow sweet.
See, right there, you had to use a whole paragraph to explain it. Portuguese speaker just says saudade, and that whole emotional reality is downloaded instantly. They have a shortcut.
Or think about Schadenfreude from German.
The pleasure you get from someone else's misfortune.
We use that word in English now. We borrowed it. But before we did we really process that emotion as its own distinct category, or did we just feel a vague, guilty mix of happy and bad?
I feel like before I knew the word Schadenfreude, I just thought I was a jerk, but naming it validates it. It puts it in a box so you can understand it as a universal human thing.
And then there's the Yagan word from Tierra del Fuego, Mami la pinatapai.
Whoa. Okay, what on earth does that mean?
It refers to a look shared between two people where both of them want to initiate something they both desire, but neither one is willing to be the first to act.
Wow. That is so specific. And yet I know exactly what that feels like. That's the awkward tension across a room.
You recognize the feeling now that I've described it, but the Yagan people have a shortcut to it. They can spot it, name it, and talk about it in a single word. We're clumsy. We say, that weird look. that vibe.
So we're back to the cage. If we don't have these words, we are emotionally stumbling around in the dark.
It really suggests that there are entire categories of human experience, emotions, logical connections, perceptions that English speakers are just effectively blind to. We lump these really complex feelings into vague buckets like sad or angry because our conceptual framework is just lower resolution than others.
And if you zoom way out,
Right.
this gets us to the unknown unknowns. This is the part of the deep dive that really got to me.
Imagine an advanced alien civilization arrives tomorrow.
Okay, got it.
If their language is built on fundamentally different conceptual categories, not just different sounds, but different ways of slicing up reality, we might not even recognize that they're communicating.
Like the himbo looking at the blue square?
Exactly. The signal would be right in front of our faces, but our brains couldn't parse it. We'd just see noise, static.
And that's not just sci-fi, is it? It makes you wonder about the huge problems we're facing. Climate change, poverty.
Right. We're trying to solve these 21st century problems using languages that evolved to handle, hunting, farming, and early politics.
What if the solution to climate change requires a conceptual framework that simply doesn't exist in our current languages?
It's a terrifying possibility that we might be staring directly at the answer, but we lack the mental software to process it. We can't see the blue square of the solution because we only have words for green this and green that.
That is heavy. It really reinforces this idea that we're in a prison where the bars are made of words.
Yeah.
And the worst part is you can't see the bars.
Because to describe the bars, you'd need a language. And the language you have is part of the bars.
Okay, before we send everyone into a full-blown existential crisis, let's talk about a practical application. Is there any way to break out? Or at least, bend the bars a little?
The most direct way is to learn new languages.
It sounds like homework, but in this context, it sounds like freedom.
It is. Bilingual people often report feeling like a slightly different person in each language. They access different memories, different emotions. By learning a language with a totally different structure, you are installing a new window in your prison cell. You get a view you never had before.
And for those of us who might not have time to learn fluent Gugu Yumathir by this weekend,
Pay attention to the struggle.
what do you mean by that?
Pay attention to those moments when you're trying to say something or think something and you just can't find the words. You feel like the words are failing you.
That frustration, that it's on the tip of my tongue feeling.
Yes, that frustration isn't just you being inarticulate. That is the feeling of bumping up against the wall of your cognitive prison. That's the edge of your map. And instead of ignoring it or forcing it into a cliche, just dwell on it.
Right.
Try to describe that gap. That's where the expansion happens.
I love that. Don't push the feeling away. Explore the gap.
And maybe, invent a word for it.
There you go. Expand the language. Expand your reality. This has been a fascinating trip into the architecture of our own minds.
It definitely changes how you look at a dictionary. It's not just a book of meanings, it's a map of our boundaries.
We'll leave you with the provocation from our source material today. If you can't say it, you can't think it. And if you can't think it, it doesn't exist. Something to chew on while you try to navigate your way north. Thanks for listening to The Deep Dive.
See you next time.